Well, Happy New Year, everybody, and stay tuned for an exciting journey. Please fasten your seatbelts. We are extending the teaching of Professor Meredith Kesh. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute. Teachings of Plasma Science. We're into advanced Earth space. But we have to talk about something that's not so advanced, about this cargo cult. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. And it is the 1st of January in the new year. The Kesh Foundation Education Series. And as you can see, we're wrapping up this trip on EarthSpace. And it's the 5th in this series of Advanced EarthSpace. It's all part of the Advanced Teaching Series, Understanding, Knowing, Insight, trying to condense 6,000 hours of teaching in such a way that newcomers can relate to, and of course the mature students gives them more information and knowledge so they can teach others. This is going to be a never-ending process, and it is quite shocking. We're all going through this shock shift because we're searching for outer space. And here we are on this little piece of the spinning pie in the sky we call Earth space. It's that little tiny red dot in the bottom right-hand corner of man's universe. And we see that the outer space is vast. And within that, we see from the first 3 books of Mr. Kesh, the universal order of the creation of matters. Fields come together and create a field, and that's a source. And our soul is one field and is also part of the origin of the universe. So as shown in book number 3, but it's also the origin of the soul. And there's a link, and that link was described in the book number 2, the structure of the light. And the structure of the light doesn't tell you which light. And so we're trying to figure out this phantom pie in the sky. And so we understand that something that's phantom is apparent to the senses, but it has no substantial existence. And so how come we keep talking about these things that have no substantial existence? What is it? And are they just satellites? Do satellites become spaceships? Are we satellites? Are we the dream satellites? And which dimension is the reality dimension? And so we've been talking about many, many stories, and we have lots of stories to talk about today, because we're going to be talking about the cargo cults of humanity. And whose story do we believe? And of course, where did all this water come from? And what about these shooting stars and asteroids and other belts in the sky? In the sky that seen chariots of fire and other big metal eagles. And of course, these chariots and eagles are looking for a landing runway. And so we never really asked the proper question. We like to jokingly ask, which came first, the chicken or the egg? But since the answer is neither, we have to understand there has to be a planet to come to. You have to know where to park your chariot. And you have to know how to land that big metal eagle in paradise. And this paradise is not Venus and it's not Mars, it's in between. And this is where the legends come from. And this is where the bounty is created. And so maybe we become the bounty hunters. Or are we actually the bounty hunted? Are we just a cargo cult in paradise?
Alex, I know your presentation is entitled Cargo Cult, and I've heard the term before, but could you just open that up for half a minute? What are we? Are we talking metaphysicality? Is this what you referred to as a cargo cult?
Can you give me a minute?
Oh, sure, sure. Take your time. I just thought it would help for us to understand, but I think you'll get to it. Great.
Okay, thanks. Little patience. Little patience. There's just a setup. There has to be a setup to understand the perspective. And the thing is that we've seen the chariots of the gods. These are the legendary chariots of fire. And they're chariots or the big metal eagles. And if they have the fire, and we have to relate to these chariots as something that we can relate to. And so we see that really they're not traveling in outer space and they're leaving Earth space. So they're going to somewhere in between space. And so we're talking about visitors in some kind of craft. And how does this affect man space? Because everything that we're looking at is, from a perspective of man space. And it's hard to understand our space when we're looking at it from the physicality. And that physicality, of course, is grounded to Earth space. And so to get to that next space, we have to really understand Earth space. And we haven't really understood it very well at all, because we've been very good at target practice. We arrived on Earth space and we were pretty accurate. But it's a big target. It goes from moon space all the way down to the core. But fortunately, we landed in that biosphere range. And this is where all things grow. And so that becomes important, because you see, the thing is that in order to understand how this happened, we have to take into account plasma. And so when someone new asks you to define plasma, you have to define it as a kind of energy state. And we all have a different point of view, and we all have understandings of the different kinds of energy states. And this all makes up a part of our understanding of our Earth space. And we need that to be able to find our inner space, because that's the key to the gateway to outer space. And yes, it is very important. We have to understand that if important is not important, well, then really nothing is important. And so before we learn how to carry these cargoes, we have to understand the plasma rules and remember that the energy states can increase or decrease by at least an order of magnitude. And the higher energy states feed the lower state. Feed as in food. And the energy states manifest through either natural creation or natural decay. Two directions. But they can remain static as a catalyst, and that becomes catalytic energy transfer state, non-consuming. And the higher the energy state, the higher the transfer rate. And the higher is by many orders of magnitude. And so the two rules, that plasma absorbs fields or plasma is a barrier of fields, we have to understand the motivation behind that, because it's bound to the ethos of the universe. Well, how does that work with us? And so we find that really the energy can be held in a field. We just have to define what a field is. And so when we look at the Earth field, the Earth space field, we see that its strength is determined by the speed of rotation. That's our field. That's the Earth space field. But we have to take into account other fields. And so we find that this field strength is accommodated for by field relations. And relations are things that could transcend many multiple energies. And so we've made a conclusion with respect to the reality dimension that the outer space is not a place. Outer space is a method of energy transfer. It's energy in motion. And so why are we always looking for the lowest common denominator? The common denominator is in the creation of the universe. It exists from energy. Energy is a charge in motion. Energy is always in motion. And so if it's in motion, it has to go somewhere. So there has to be something else. And that's why all things are working in combination. But if we're only looking at things from a point of view of Earth space, it doesn't add up. There are other energy states. And we know that because as we learn about the plasma science, we see that we can turn it on and turn it off. And that relates to feeding. We can increase or decrease the strength and enhance or diminish that field strength to change our positioning. And there are various ways to learn that on this planet. So the scientific way is to understand the core components, the electrons and the protons, the PM ticks and the rays. And then we find that the PM ticks are magnetical electrons, and the electron is part of the atom. And it's married to a proton, and the two together create a gravitational field. But there's a plasmatic field, a plasmatic gravitational field. And of course, there's a physical gravitational field. But in order to get that physical gravitational field, we have to see how these forces come together. And they form three dimensions. And this is done by the universal harvesting, as in food. Harvesting in a self-enhancement fashion. And so we can create a gravitational core. But if we don't understand that harvesting skill, because maybe we're too arrogant, like city boys. Maybe we understand why we're preoccupied with loosh harvesting, which is the stealing of energy from others, and not recognizing the fact that stealing energy from others results in self-consumption, and it creates a binding. And that binding of energy, yeah, we need that binding of energy to create a manifestation point. But when we deceive, lie, cheat, and steal, and double cross, we steal energy at the expense of others. And so history is something that has helped us to understand our mistakes. And it's also helped us to understand our point of view. But it has also limited our knowledge, because we need to understand history with a direct connection. And we've been able to do that. And how do you do that in physicality? Well, you can't. And so as city boys, I grew up in Toronto. And as all city boys are smart. And Toronto happens to be the home to the largest soccer league in the world. It was part of the multiculturalism that was developed after the Second World War. We had a lot of refugees. And my family was one of them. And when we came here, we found that most soccer fields were just dirt. Country boys were very stupid. But grass became very important in my life because as a child, I was very close to the grass. In fact, I was on my hands and knees in the grass, and our grass was not very good. I had a trip with my dad. I went to the Varsity Stadium. This was a stadium in Toronto in 1955. And for some reason, I remember it really, really well because it was a massive stadium, huge. Well, you understand, I was 4 years old. And the thing that I remember the most is I remember the knobby knees of a Scotsman who was bigger than my dad. And oh man, was he ever tough. And he was very kind to me. And he was so tall. So I only got a good look at his kneecaps. And the other thing that was fascinating was the lush green grass. It was amazing. I had never seen green grass like that. It was beautiful. And this was the home to the greatest Canadian soccer team, Toronto City. It was a team of celebrities, and my dad was on that team. And really, it was very hard for us to get 5,000 fans. And most Toronto teams always, or hardly ever, got more than 5,000 fans. In fact, 1,000 fans sometimes. And this great team folded. It was a generic team, a team of all ethnics. And the reason we had the largest league was because we had so many different ethnics. And they all came from war-torn countries, and they brought their soccer skills here. And this is what the stadium looked like. It's a picture in 1980. And you can see the poor grass in the center there. That's not the field that I remember. The field I remember was lush green grass. But this stadium can hold 25,000 people. And you understand that Toronto is the fourth largest city in North America with over 4 million people. And this was a very important stadium. What's that got to do with Papua New Guinea? This is the home of the cargo cult. It's an island in the southwestern Pacific. And as you can see here, it's an island just north of that other big island we call a continent, Australia. That's a tropical jungle country. But it's the home of the cargo cult, where in the tropics, forest was lost because the residents of New Guinea gained a dependence on big metal eagles. And these big metal eagles had to land somewhere. And that's part of the story. But the other part of the story is that a crisis developed when the eagles stopped landing, because the cargo cult forgot how to grow food. They became dependent on these big metal eagles. And it's just hard to believe that you could be in a beautiful tropical paradise and not be able to feed yourself. So what's food and cargo cults have to do with it? Well, you see, there was a tropical jungle. And of course, it's muddy, the ground is soft. And how do you land big, heavy cargo planes in the tropical jungle? So you had to build landing strips. And what they used to build these landing strips was massive quantities of anhydrous ammonia. And the reason they used this chemical on the floor of the tropical jungle is because it would harden the soil. The soil would harden so much so that you could bring these heavy American cargo planes, and we know how big they are, and land as if they were landing on a regular runway. And they landed so frequently that the residents became used to it, and they looked forward to receiving this cargo. And what was on this cargo? Well, food, yeah, food was there, and there were other things. And why, of all places, do you have to land in a tropical jungle and build landing strips out of anhydrous ammonia? Why do I have to do that? I don't know. You'll have to answer that question yourself. And we have to remember the story of Noah and his ark. Well, Canadians learned this lesson because we're one of the world's leading producers of bull semen, and we export it to Germany. And so as farmers, we became excellent farmers, and we needed fertilizer. It's entirely possible that country boys are smarter than city boys. Let's look at this fertilizer, anhydrous ammonia. Household ammonia is diluted water. It only contains 5 or 10% ammonia. But anhydrous ammonia is essentially pure ammonia, over 99% pure. And anhydrous is a Greek word meaning without water. So anhydrous ammonia is ammonia without water. And this is a fertilizer. And as you can see, at the core is the nitrogen, the gravitational core, and the hydrogen is at the magnetical outer layer. Now, fertilizers have been in the news lately. It's been very important. And because of the key component, nitrogen, we find that fertilizers, and primarily nitrogen fertilizers, are directly related to the price of natural gas, which is methane, which is carbon with 4 hydrogens. And so we find there's a direct relationship. And we find that 1 ton of anhydrous ammonia fertilizer requires 33,500 cubic feet of natural gas. And it's the greatest part of the manufacturing process of anhydrous ammonia. And anhydrous ammonia is a fertilizer, yet the American Corps of Engineers used anhydrous ammonia to make runways for big cargo planes. And they carried cargoes. And so farmers use it to store and use it as at agricultural retailers and facilities with ammonia refrigeration systems. You don't want to turn it into a gas because the gas has problems. But look, anhydrous ammonia is also a key ingredient in the legal production of methamphetamine. Oh, no, no. Methamphetamines. Amphetamines. Illegal drug makers often steal anhydrous ammonia from areas where it is stored or used. Isn't that strange? And also, when it comes in contact with water, it forms an alkali that chemically burns animal tissue. It burns body tissue unless it's diluted by large quantities of water. So I think you can understand how they created these runways. It was very effective in eliminating the vegetation. And then in the process of eliminating that vegetation by constantly applying the fertilizer, the ground hardened strong enough for cargo planes to land. And so getting back to that, my connection with grassroots, one of the problems for me growing up is there were no minor soccer leagues, not like today. The soccer leagues at the grassroots level. And we didn't have very good grass anyway, so it didn't matter. We found that the fertilizer was hardening the soil. And we found that the fertilizer had problems with water solubility. And there was problems with fertilizer runoff. And Prince Edward Island in Canada is a potato capital. And they have lots of problems with their drinking water. And in many areas, we have even evidence of liquid manure in the aquifers which supply the drinking water. So we're having a lot of trouble with fertilizers and with grass. One of the ways to deal with the grass, and city boys who had to learn about landscaping, you had to learn about the terminology, right? You had to learn about what turf was and top dressing, very, very technical terms. And of course, the number one rule, we were talking about plasma rules. Well, the number one rule in landscaping is to make sure the green side is up. And so we had sod farms that actually cultivated, farmed sod grass. And we need a lot of sod grass because we had golf courses, and golf courses needed grass. And one of the problems on these golf courses, of course, was that you had to fertilize them. And then, of course, along comes the golfer who hits a divot. And for those who don't know what a divot is when a golfer slices up a part of the grass at the same time he makes a shot. Etiquette suggests that you need to pick up that divot and replace it in the hole that you made and pat it down nicely so the grass will grow again. But you find that the divots seem to really, really be plentiful because an interesting phenomenon happens. When you apply the fertilizer is not water soluble. There's a delayed reaction that goes over 2 to 3 months. And so in the meantime, the roots are needing the nutrition from the fertilizer. And instead of going down deeply and knitting the grass, if you will, to the soil below, the roots become shallow. And in fact, they actually curve back up towards the surface where the fertilizer is sitting. And so we find that this has created an industry of big green lawn tractors and it becomes very, very important. And I had a problem with a sod farm and a green lawn tractor. And my first problem, of course, was that the sod farm was my neighbor, and they used a lot of fertilizer. And I was such a smart boy, city boy, but not smart enough to realize that my well was polluted. And I didn't find that out until too late. And of course, the lawn tractor was cutting the grass all the time. And the reason for that was to keep away the dandelions. Well, how does that all fit in? So we found that we had lots to learn. And city boys weren't so smart after all. So we not only had to learn about fertilizer, and not only learn about farming, but we had to learn about the relationship between fertilizer and water. And we had to learn this fancy terminology of NPK, which stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. There's a ratio within the fertilizer. But because of the runoff, and because of the high phosphate content of the grass fertilizer, it ran off into the well that we were using for drinking water. And as I say, we generated a lot of dead fish. So this forced me into another thing to learn about water. And so we used the Kangen water because it gave us alkaline water. But the water in Canada was as hard as it was in Africa, in the Rift Valley. We jokingly refer to it as Jesus water because the water is so hard you can walk on it. It's bad enough that the fertilizer makes the ground hard, but so does the water. So we find that it would do damage to our pipes and everything. So we introduced water softeners. The trouble is, most of the water softeners in Canada were hooked up to the drinking water. And in fact, they were hooked up to the taps that went to the water that watered the grass. And so a lot of people had dead grass. And some farmers had dead cows and dead trees. So many problems. And one of the things I did discover was this gift I got from Africa, where in Africa, this is a invasive species. It's a problem in Africa. And they treat it chemically. And this is a plant that's grown in the water. And I used it to feed the fish. I used it to fertilize the trees. And I used it to clean the water of heavy metals. And I was great at it. And this was very important because I live in a very polluted place. They're just down the road from Toronto, of course, was Hamilton. It was the home to steel refineries. The pollution was so bad you could cut it with a knife. And in Sudbury, in the great north of Canada, the pollution was so bad you could cut it with a knife. It was home to the world's largest mine, and now it's owned by Brazilian interests. And there's a creek that runs through Sudbury. We call it Copper Creek. And this creek is probably the cleanest creek in the world. It's so clean, even algae doesn't grow in there. It's absolutely, totally sterile. And of course, the pollution causes acid rain. And how do you know that? Well, because dandelions have very, very deep roots. We're talking many, many meters deep. And the purpose of it is to bring up the calcium to the surface to help create a more alkaline soil. And so, depending on how much alkalinity was needed, or shall we say, how much acidity in the soil was there, would determine how many dandelions you had. And of course, this was the bane of sod farmers, so they made sure that they cut the grass frequently so that dandelions wouldn't be able to turn to seed and grow and produce more dandelions. But Sudbury was the dandelion capital. I'd never seen so many dandelions. And in fact, the grass wasn't really that green. It was more yellow from dandelions. And that was all from the pollution. But I also was growing these plasma dandelions because I used the plasma water to bring peace and harmony to my place. And I never seen a 1 meter tall dandelion. And so maybe there was something about fertilizer that we were missing. Maybe there was more knowledge to be had. And how does that affect us? Well, you see, we have two of the greatest carbon sinks. One is the Canadian forest, and two is the Amazon rainforest. But ironically and disappointingly, Canada is the worst carbon offender, the world's worst. So we are number one. But we have too many forest fires. So when you have a large forest, it attracts forest fires. And when you have forest fires, you create a carbon problem. But what's Brazil's problem with the Amazon rainforest? Well, we talked about this great flood. And we see that it's entirely possible. I haven't proven it, but the question becomes, if you look at Africa, the northern part of Africa has a Sahara Desert, and the southern part of Europe does not. And if there was a great flood, which was caused by an earth upheaval, an axial polar shift, is it possible that the Mediterranean Sea ended up flooding the top part of Africa? And would this be a problem? Only if the Mediterranean Sea was salty, and of course it was. And so that salt condition would create a flood. Would create a desert. It's a possibility. Why not? Why wouldn't it create a desert condition? That's what they did in Papua New Guinea. They hardened the soil with fertilizer. That's not the whole story. The problem, of course, was in the Amazon rainforest, because the Amazon rainforest was sitting on top of desert, sand. And that sand came from the Sahara Desert. And when we see the wind patterns that are coming from Africa over to the West, we can understand that a lot of desert sand would have come from there. And I didn't understand what top dressing was, but basically what you're doing is leveling out the ground by applying another substrate to your soil, and evening it out, and counting on the fact that the vegetation underneath would grow through that, and so you would actually level off the land and in effect top dress it. That's what that meant. And the amazing thing about the Amazon rainforest is that it was built on only a few inches of soil. A few inches of soil. Below it was massive quantities of desert sand. And so the question was, how can the Amazon rainforest be so prolific and the Sahara Desert be so barren if both had a substrate made out of the same desert sand? And so I think if we understand how water filtration would work, if the sand was lifted up into the atmosphere and carried across and landed in Brazil, would it bring the salt with it, or would it be purified in the process? Something was different. Something was different. And if we don't know what it was, this is what we do know. The conditions were the same, but the results were different. One was a desert, and one was a tropical rainforest, and bountiful. And so when we look at the history, and we see that there's different versions of history, depending on what people say, but we only look at the physicality. We don't see what's causing them. And so all we see is when two forces come together, and that's all we account for. We like the flash, the glow, the glitter, but mainly we like the profitability. And so we build grass farms in the Brazilian rainforest so that we can grow cattle to supply the food industry. So is that bountifulness? So if we're using fertilizer to harden the soil, and we're using fertilizer to enhance our food production, maybe there's something that we're not getting quite right. And so we see the limitations of nuclear science and how it's keeping us, shall we say, in the dark. Because when we look at how the universe was created, there's ethics, morality, compassion, and courage, which are all contributing to life and life creation. And so with our science, if we're looking at the opposite, what kind of science is that exactly? And so we're not really understanding that when we're looking at the nuclear decay of the neutron, we're not seeing that when we look at the periodic tables, it doesn't add up, because we look at the mass of the neutron and the mass of the atom, which is an electron-proton combination, but we don't see the decay process. We don't see the release of the PM ticks. We don't see the connection. And we don't see the connection between the electron and the proton, where the magnetic field of the large twin plasma of the proton feeds the smaller magnetical field of the electron, feeding as in food. And we don't understand the emission as in feeding, and the absorption as in being fed. And we don't understand that this is going at light speed, because we don't know what the speed is. And it doesn't really matter. What does matter is the reality dimension. We know that there's a plasmatic spectrum because we've seen it. We know there's a physical spectrum. We live it. And so there is a connection. There has to be a connection. And so the plasma feeding rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, is one of the most important rules that we have to understand. And we can't be dependent on big metal birds to come and feed us. We have to understand that there's magnetical force fields of attraction and repulsion, which we call magnetical and gravitational field forces. And this is part of the feeding and the feedback system. What we didn't say is what kind of food are we feeding and what are we feeding back? And is it just regurgitation? Or is it what the universe is feeding us and transcending the various reality dimensions and coming to that gravitational point of stability of our Earth space? And so we find that all this energy in motion is magnetical, and it's a two-way street, isn't it? And we have the scientific proof in theory and now in practice. And we can see that there's changeabilities. And the reason for that is because we have to take other things into account. Because these other things take into account the rotation, the speed, the strength, and the direction of flow. And this all determines on how much we emit magnetically and how much we absorb gravitationally. These are charges in motion. And so that principal matter that is coming from the universe is in the form of PM ticks is that magnetical feeding. And the feedback that we're getting from the Earth is that feedback we call inertia. And so between the here and the there, it is the us, the plasma gem, the conversion of principal matter, transition matter, and convergence matter. And we see that with our ganses. And we find that the ganses are actually a feeding product. And we see through the solid glass, and we see the solid gans. Well, it's not solid, it's physical. And then we see the hole in the middle. It's not that there's nothing there, it's just that it's transparent. And so that's the feedback. And that's our biosphere dimension. And so we see all these things around us feeding back to us and actually allowing us to understand what works and what doesn't work. And all good intentions, have to be rationalized. And if we are using anhydrous ammonia as a fertilizer and in copious quantities, we harden the soil, maybe applying this fertilizer over long periods of time, albeit in smaller quantities, would have the same effect. And maybe this is one of the reasons we've had this agricultural crisis on this planet, this problem that we're having with fertilizer. And now more than ever, these cups of life come into play because we have been, as plasma scientists, able to create something at the core. We've done this gravitationally. We've created CO2 and calcium. There we go, and copper and zinc and water and amino acids, which is the combination of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we have this interaction with the earth, which tells us whether or not we're doing things correctly. And there's a feeding and a feedback and an interaction. But it's an interaction between the man space and the earth space. But not only. And so we know that the Earth space is doing its part because it's been able to take the two rotating hemispheres that are in a plasmatic condition and manifest them into the one physical rotating space that we recognize as our Earth space. And so with that, we see the sun that gives us the energy for us to grow. Food, yeah, food, that's the stuff. But there's a big difference because when the sun shines on the earth, plants grow. And when it shines on us, well, we kind of tan a little bit. But the big difference, of course, is that the earth rotates but doesn't walk. And we walk, but we don't rotate. And so we see that there's a relationship with the sun. And so this sun is emitting and the earth is absorbing gravitationally. And it always knows which way is up. And when you look at our planet positioning, we're always in that specific location. We always follow that orbit. And there are no cargo cults. There are no big metal eagles delivering cargo. But there's a lot of wobble in the action of the earth. And that wobble is actually life-giving. Because the energy has to be following a binding path. But we've come to know now that certain energies don't come into this binding. They just pass right on through. And this is part of the new learning. And as such, we are giving off energies. We have to, in order to maintain our Maggrav condition. And so this Maggrav becomes a feeding dimension. Feeding as in food. And so energy is coming in and energy is going out. So the out is the emission and the in is the absorption. So what exactly are we doing? And then when we're feeding out, what happens then? How does it come back? And so we find that, yes, there's an inner space feeding radiance, but there's a feedback radiance also. And so that's that Earth space field that is working with that Earth space point, that gravitational point within the Earth space field. But not only. We have a transmission field. And that's where the relationships come in, and we see the shortcomings of the scientific community not understanding the magnetical gravitational balance that we call a Maggrav situation, although they've tried to explain it. And then we have the spiritual scientists who can't explain it. They just want you to believe based on legends and history. But we know that the spirit is the motor of the soul. And the plasma science is adding to this knowledge. So really the question then becomes is what is the rate of change? And now that we're in the new year, we have to understand that this dynamic plasma relationship is really and truly dynamic. And so when we look at this relationship, we have to extend the field and include the sun space field. And likewise, that sun space gravitational point within the sun space field. Same relationship. And not only, but with others. We're not the only planet in the sun space field? And do we have a relationship with these other planets? Do these other planets contribute to our paradise here? Or do they affect us in another way? The thing is, we are in balance. So we have to keep this balance. We have to understand not only what time it is, but we have to understand the evidence. Because even though the snow melts away and the water washes away, the legends remain. And we see the footprints all over the place. We see it in our RNA, in our DNA, in our diamonds, our magraphs, and in our pyramids. We see it in our carpets, in our clothes. We see it all around. We just have to recognize what we see. And we have to know the difference between paradise and being a cargo cult. Why are we a cargo cult in paradise? That's like being in a restaurant and going hungry. So we see this principle interaction. That's energy is always in motion, and it's a two-way street. And there are many, many ways. They could go through the polar axis. They can go through the magnetical poles. They can go through the emission pole and the absorption pole. And it can absorption. And all of this is a feeding radiance, and there's always a feedback radiance as part of the reality dimension. The combination of the two is the reality dimension. There has to be a connection. Always has to be a connection. And so it is through this connection that the Keshe Foundation is going into outer space. And now the time has come. The time has come to tell the world. And understand that is this plasma feeding, as in food, that leads to this manifestation. And what are we feeding? What is it that's coming from this plasmatic reality that's feeding us in the physical reality? And do we understand what we're doing? And how do we feel about that? Because the emotion of presence is another form artifact of energy and motion. And so all of these manifestation points determine whether or not we're in the physical dimension or in the plasmatic dimension. Well, you see, we're in both. The question is which one dominates us. And so the plasmatic dimension is always the substrate supporting structure of the physicality, always. The physicality is the least strongest dimension, but it does serve a purpose. Because the soul of man, being the essential you, is this interaction between the plasmic gen state and the matter gen state. But then here we are in Earth space. And so our soul of the body, being the surrogate you, that's the interaction between you and this environment. And so all this has to do with the soul of the Earth relationships. And the soul of the Earth, of course, is relating to the soul of the sun, but it also relates to the soul of man. And so this interaction is coming via the soul of the Earth body and our body. And so this Earth space manifests into the physicality of the Earth body and the physicality of our body. So the soul of the earth body could interact with the soul of the sun and manifest the physicality of the earth. Now we can land our chariots of fire and our big metal eagles. And come to paradise. And what are we? We are the ground satellites. And we've seen the indomitable spirit of legends. This is the guiding hand in outer space that travels at some nebulous speed, which is faster than Earth light, and faster than Mars light, faster than the Bohr light, and faster than the asteroid light. This is what legends are made from. And the Earth is connected via the Peace Stone. And the strength of that connection is in the gravitational core. It's the strength of that gravitational core that feeds the legends. And so when we look at the agriculture, look at what the vertical people are doing. They have a biosphere of peace. And Earth is the chosen bountiful one. The majority seek the call of freedom and emancipation. This is normal. And man's existential crisis defaults to understanding how to harvest, as in food, of the plasma energy of the plasma universe. So here we are at this landing point. And our landing point is determined by our physical materialization. There's more to it because the physical materialization is the physical aspect of the manifestation, but there is a plasmatic manifestation as well. And that connection connects to other plasmatic manifestation and other forms of materialization. And this is all done through outer space. And as we continue searching for outer space, we have to realize that outer space is that reality dimension, and we've already found it. Because all you have to look at is the evidence in our pursuit of happiness. We find that we're actually experiencing a launch field failure. Man has never launched a rocket into outer space. And why are we so preoccupied with launching a rocket when we see that all the souls that were born on Earth space preferred to come here as opposed to Mars space? Earth space doesn't need the cargo plane. The Earth space is the cargo plane. And man space is on Earth space. Are we the cargo cult? Are we the cargo? So we understand that the energy then is magnetical and gravitational, but being a two-way street, it always comes to some gravitational stability. And so we have to be that gravitational stability because our Earth space has that gravitational stability to withstand the Earth upheavals that history has shown. But now we're going into a new era where we not only have to ask, where are we going after we die? But we really have to ask is, how were we born? Because the fact is we were born, and we were born using an outer space system that brought us into this Earth space. And is this just part of the trip? Is this the halfway point to a round trip? And we see a lot of souls continuing. And the fact of the matter is that we are inherently peaceful. And the earth doesn't belong to us so that we can destroy it. This is why all the souls are coming together for the purpose of peace. But the souls have been coming here for ages. And they do their job and they go. And what is their job? So we have to roll out that gravitational carpet and understand the players of this legendary League of Dreams that we have. This legendary League of Dreams that has many visiting souls. And we, as the resident souls, need to welcome them. And we ask ourselves, which reality dimension do these visitors come from? Tourists want to visit heaven and prefer EARTHSPACE. That's why they're coming here. That's why we came here. So all the residents have fields. All the residents have souls. And all the fields have souls. And these souls travel through the various reality dimensions. And which reality dimension did we come from? We came from that plasma feeding dimension. We are the cargo cult in EARTHSPACE. And we have a problem with food security. And we have a problem with agriculture. But we have a solution. And so the whole discussion of food security and agriculture becomes irrelevant. And the most important thing becomes the grass. That grass that I was playing on. We just finished the World Cup in Qatar. There was a lot of good grass was needed. And there are many beautiful stadiums. But the Maracana Stadium in Brazil holds the record for attendance, 200,000 plus. And their practice field is larger than Varsity Stadium. And Argentina was celebrating. And they had over 4 million fans celebrating the World Cup. That crowd was larger than Toronto, the 4th largest city in North America. That was a special event, a special moment. There was one other time that Varsity Stadium had great grass. There were great players on that field. And yeah, there was only 25,000 people, but you know what? It was sold out. It was standing room only. And this time there's another legend, a 35-year-old legend. And one of the things I couldn't understand about my dad was he liked to be the big fish in a small pond. And here was Pele, the biggest fish. in a really small pond. And that's where the similarity ends. And just for the record, the strategy of the home team was to impose a very serious man-to-man marking on the Great One. But he never got angry. He never got visibly upset. And this is him coming out for the second half. And you can see it transcends the races, transcends the colors, transcends the ages of standing room only in this event. Yeah, I was there with my dad. My dad retired at the age of 41. And from then on, he said he had one foot in the grave. I didn't understand because I was too young. But I really wanted to be there. And the only way that the game could have been better was if the score, instead of 3-0, would have been 3-1, and if Bailey would have scored. But the strategy was brilliant, because if we didn't have a strategy for the home team, you could see the greatness. Pele brought credibility to North America. And that wasn't just physical. Because when you watch the move, he just floated over the grass. The grass was beautiful. So we all know that he had a great on-field career. This is the third time in doing these classes I had to talk about greatness, transcending the soccer field. Maradona, Pablito, and Pele. But Pele was not in uniform. Pele was retired. He lived another 41 years beyond my dad's retirement age, to the age of 82. Exactly double my dad's retirement age. And he was a celebrity at 17 years old. And he was a soccer legend, on and off the field. Yes, he won the World Cup, but he became a world ambassador, not only for soccer, but for the world. Because he taught us a lesson, an unbelievable lesson, that the greatest field strength is that we are all equal. Cancer, drug addiction, emotional psychosomatic conditions will also be going into history. We are in the post-December 16, 2022 era, and we have new choices and to understand the transmutation space and the bountiful space and the graceful space in between. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, Teachings of Plasma Science. We're calling all EARTHSPACE patriots. There's a World Peace Treaty. Sign it with the pen, sign it with your heart. As we've discovered, the Earth has overlapping fields. These fields are of life with freedom from boundaries or abuse. We are neither cargo nor a cult. And the earthbound is going through a gravitational transformation where we're restoring the physical and emotional vitality. Doing that transmutation connection of the transparency point and that manifestation point, whether it's plasmatically or physically. In either case, it's a bountifulness and it's part of the healing process of the inner space of Earth and connects equally to the universal inner space of freedom and Earth's legends of upheaval and history. This is colliding with man's plurality. Plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. And so welcome to the outer space age. And that's the end of this lesson. Thank you all for joining me on this trip. I hope you enjoyed it. Back to you.
Well, thank you for delivering consistently, Alex. I looked in the attendees list. I don't think there's anyone here for the first time, although I will ask. If anyone's here for the first time, please let us know how you found us and where you're from. And let's open the floor up to any questions anyone has. I think what Alex talked about or in relation to the Keshe Foundation. It came back to me, the cargo cult, as you were proceeding with your presentation. I remember this airfield, seeing it on television, and then they sort of replicated. I think they replicated the plane as well, didn't they? Hoping another flight would come in. I mean, in a simple way, not a flying aircraft, but some sort of replication.
Oh, I had a chance to talk to the gentleman who was there. It was, I was shocked to hear this story. I would never have thought that the people in New Guinea would be suffering hunger. And I never thought that they would use fertilizer to make runways. No wonder we're having agricultural problems.
Well, if we move into this new dimension of feeding, I think the agriculture will be tailing off. I don't know how rapidly that will happen. I know he said we could always eat if you wanted to have the pleasure of eating. But I think we'll be doing more in the plasmatic. You say we come from the dimension of plasma feeding dimension, but how come we forgot it when we landed here? I know Mr. Keshe said we have to teach the soul how to feed the physicality. I would think since the soul, nothing's hidden from the soul would know, but even at 80%, I think that's a pretty good job. It's at least passing, but now we just have to fill that 20% gap.
Well, you see, the thing, Mark, is that when we look at these soccer players and their fame, and you understand that we're playing in this field, but how do we transcend that field? And you look at the example, and Pele is a prime example. because he was Brazilian first. He was a soccer player second. But his greatest accomplishment was what he did as an ambassador, because he would be present to hand out the trophies to the winners. But he didn't, shall we say, steal the limelight. He was there to honor the work and effort that the people did who participated in these sporting events, because he knew what it took to be a winner. He didn't go there to earn accolades. He earned all the accolades on the field. But was that the end of his career? No. In fact, the greatness of his career extended beyond his playing field. And so he transcended that. And the thing is that when he made the presentation, someone would look at him and say, I'm being presented a trophy from the greatest player. But he didn't come as the greatest player. He came as a fan. And he demonstrated through his life that we are all equal. And this was a hard lesson to understand. But if you were there at the stadium, I mean, you have to understand that he received all the attention. And even though he didn't score, he got a standing ovation and the utmost respect, because we couldn't get more than 5,000 fans to the game. And the place was jam-packed. It was the hottest ticket in town. And probably today, if I would have had the ticket stubs, I could sell them for $1 million. But I didn't go there for that purpose. I wanted to see the greatness on that beautiful green grass of the varsity stadium. And I, for years, couldn't figure out why that memory of seeing that grass when I was a child, why that memory lingered. And maybe now, for the first time, I've seen the connection, why that was important to me. We all have stories. We've all been touched by the greatness of Pele and of the other stars like him. And we see how it matters. We've seen the craziness in Argentina. It matters. But why does it matter? And what is the message? And we forget that the message that the World Cup brought, if you didn't know, the World Cup originated as a challenge between the colonizers of Europe and the colonies of South America. And by the way, we'll just let other people come in and make it a World Cup. But that was really what was going on. And it's always been that way until Pele came onto the scene. And he demonstrated something that was beyond. He demonstrated art. He demonstrated humility. That picture you see when he was at the age of 35 and how physically fit he was. And in fact, there was his retirement game. And as they carried him around the stadium and he took off his shirt, you could see that he was a tremendous physical specimen, even at an older age. That doesn't come from without hard work. He knew what it took to be great, but he was great because of the effort that he put into it. And regardless of how much adulation we showered him, he never lost his humbleness and he never lost his purpose. What was his purpose? And I think now the timing is incredible. The timing is unbelievable. As we go into the new outer space age, his job was done. He was on the biggest stage on this planet. The World Cup stage was the biggest stage. And he kept being that star, but not to the point that he was like an American Idol. He taught us all about equality. We're all equal. And the timing is amazing. You wonder why the world is soccer nuts when you see that kind of beauty. And as Mr. Kesh keeps referring to the bend it like Beckham, soccer is more than just a physical game. You don't get 4 million people coming out to greet the home team because it's just a game. Back to you, Mark.
Yes, I think it's a good lesson for someone to achieve such fame and notoriety that he still remained humble and remained equal to the others. That's quite a lesson, I think, for all of us. Would someone else like to bring something up here that you might have heard or seen or have a question about? I was thinking about this fertilizer you're talking about. I didn't realize how much gas, and that gas is just burned off and gone into the atmosphere, Alex, to create this 1 ton of ammonia? Or
Of
do they
course,
catch
yes.
other things?
Oh, look, when 1 and 1 is 2, that's all you want.
I'll
You
throw
have
the
a
rest away.
process. Yeah, the rest is garbage, right? And then, of course, we have the business of garbage. And, you know, one of the best businesses really is the business of scrap metal because, but even that's going to suffer because one of the reasons that the business of scrap metal is so good is because the prices of the metals are continuing to are changeable, are so changeable. So if are hoarding the proper metal and selling it at a higher price, then that increases the profitability. And of course, this is where the mining comes in. But what is the mining doing? And so you can see that the impact of our activity and how it's affecting on the Earth space is going to be radically changed with the new plasma science. And you can see that there's going to be a lot of people who are upset about this. But the thing is that, you know, when you start to see greatness, that'll be the gravitational force. And it may have been a small stadium at Varsity Stadium, but all the people came not to root for the home team, but to root for Pele. And they were rewarded. It was a great spectacle. I didn't know it was going to be his last game in Canada, and I didn't know how important it was going to be. And I didn't understand what was going through my dad's mind because you see in 1955 for that great team in Toronto, my dad was 30 years old. and 30 years, you're just at the end of your career. And so World War II came right in between in those peak years of my dad's career, and he never really recovered. And he hung on to everything about his career. And once he retired, he had one foot in the grave. And I said, how can you do that? How can you be like that? And you look at, how other athletes in any sport, how they transition, from an active physical life where they are the stars to then going back into the background and being has-beens. It's hard. It's very traumatic. But who's teaching you? Who's teaching you those lessons? So my dad taught me the lesson, and I realized at that point, that his way was not working. And I look at my dad's career and Pele's career, and I'm not saying skill wise, but my dad was definitely highly skilled. I mean, he was playing on the senior team at the age of 13, so he definitely had talent, and I seen that, but I only seen it in his older years, and I can't imagine what it was like when he was younger. But the problem is that once his career finished, his life finished. Well,
Yeah.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah, Mr. Kesh has mentioned that about some of these star athletes. Once they're out of the limelight, so to speak, they're not the star anymore. It seems like their existence, I don't know if they develop the Parkinson's, the Alzheimer's, one of these other diseases,
Yeah,
because
yeah, ALS.
they can't handle not being the center of attention anymore.
No, it's tremendously difficult, and again, referring to Toronto, one of my favorite players, Borja Saming, who played for the Toronto Maple Leafs, he was honored over a month ago in Maple Leaf Gardens uh, as the greatest player, and he came over from Sweden with his family, and he was suffering from Lou Gehrig's disease, and I thought, man, he's very lucky to have been brought in this position, and yet we couldn't get in touch with him. And it was after that ceremony that he died. It wasn't a week or two, and I'm trying to make arrangements to figure out how to contact him, and I get the news that he passed away. We didn't even get a chance. It wouldn't have been great, but he couldn't handle the loss of the stardom, and then he came back to Maple Leaf Gardens, and he was fed an enormous amount of adulation, and obviously he couldn't handle that either, because when he left, I mean, it was just a very fast downhill trip. And then we see that in like you say, in so many different athletes, and you wonder, well, it's not about the money, because they have the money. Pele, apparently, and I don't know for certain, but he had colon cancer. And of all the cancers, that is one of the easiest to deal with. And yet he succumbed. Now, maybe Maybe physically it was easy to deal with. Maybe there were other problems. Maybe there were psychosomatic problems. Because let's face it, he died right after the World Cup. And we know that he watched his beloved Brazil play. It's amazing how these psychological games are played out with us all individually. But what I choose to remember is how much of an ambassador he was. And this is the point. Yeah, he could be an ambassador for soccer because he was a famous soccer player. But he could have been an ambassador for anything. And we now have to be ambassadors. We have to be ambassadors of peace. This is our planet. This is our time. We have the plasma science. We have the skill. We have the greatness. We're at the right place at the right time. We just have to realize that we're there and what we can do with it. And it isn't for our own selfish purpose. Because when our neighbors are ailing, our community is sick. And we are part of that community. You cannot extricate yourself from that community. This is the lesson. And this is why you see when you're looking at the Brazilian classes, they'll have a class at home and 40 people will show up. The only way that you can get 40 people to show up in Canada is to bring 4 cases of beer. It's a difference in culture, a difference in attitude. It's a difference in how serious people are. And how important this is. We have to look beyond the boundaries of our own physical man space. We have to take care of our earth space and understand that through taking care of the earth space, we contribute to the care and comfort of sun space. And now we understand the pattern from there, and then it becomes a matter of skill and practice and repetition. Back to you, Mark.
Yes, and Mr. Kesh mentioned ambassadors in the last workshop. He said there are many here among them who are ambassadors from other places, and we're going to actually see them manifest in their original form, I think. I don't know if that'll be videoed, but I think we'll be able to see that. Even though they've taken on the clothes of a man, we'll see where they're from, what ambassador is from where, different parts of the universe. And they're here with us, and they will be manifesting. So we're going to be meeting a number of ambassadors, I think. Would anyone else like to raise a question or a point or convey a thought or an idea? We haven't heard much about the material enhancement unit from Mr. Kesh as of late. I'm sure it's ready to go and can produce copper or gold or whatever, and maybe it's not time for that, for the markets to get a little upset that there's a new technology. So perhaps he's saving that for later. What are your thoughts on this material enhancement? Are we going to be meeting this material enhancement as much as we thought we were? I know time will go on. There'll still be coins and other things minted, cash coins. Will we? Yeah.
Yep.
No, the idea of the material enhancement, we haven't heard much about this as of late. I was just thinking why.
Well, there are two things that affect the rate of change. And one, of course, is the urgency. And so, if we're having food security and energy security problems, that becomes an existential crisis. So that becomes an immediate crisis. But we're also going to go through a psychological crisis because I was, contemplating our position, and I'm so grateful to have been, aware of all of this. So the path that I took, regardless of how difficult it may have been, has brought me here. And I need to be grateful for that. I need to look at the silver lining, and there is a silver lining, is I'm aware, and I went through this shock over 30 years ago. And it's a shock. It's a shocking shock. Well, if we are maybe coming in contact with maybe 6% of the population, that leaves 94% who are unaware. That's a big mountain. And how long is it going to take? And so, in many ways, by going with these new systems, we speed that up by orders of magnitude, which is very important. But so you become aware, and what happens? And this happened to me many times, like, there was cancer in my family and we got rid of it, and people asked us how to do it, and we told them, and through our facility, we handled about 21,000 cases. And you say, well, where are those cases today? I'm taken care of. Thank you very much. Okay. It sucks to be you. And, we'll see you. And that's nice. And it's the same thing that's happening today. You tell people about the plasma science and say, oh, well, that's nice. Okay, well, how's that going to affect your life? Well, I don't care. It's not my problem. And this is the kind of attitude that we have. And I'm saying this is the kind of attitude we have in Canada. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but I see what's happening in Brazil. And it's, I think there were close to 12,000 members on the Telegram channel there. And Canada's at around 100. And even the American channel is pulling away. I think you're all the way up to at least 300, I think.
No, actually, we lost a few members in the last couple of weeks. I don't know. We were at a couple hundred, a little over. And so I don't know if these were all bots or people just decided to drop out or the numbers are not real. What happened? But they'll all come along. I have no doubt about
there's
that.
only 400 and there's only 400 million people, between our two countries, right? It's got a long way to go, but it's just it's shocking to see the figures. It's shocking to see the results, and then you say, well, all of us here on this panel are knowledgeable. We get to talk about this, but we now have a gap, a larger gap, and maybe that is a stronger field, but the gap between those who know and don't know is widening because we're doing this every week, and we keep coming for more punishment every week because not because we have nothing to do, but we not only need to understand it ourselves, which is important, but we need to understand it in such a way that we can convey it to others, because say 3 years ago when we started with these public classes with the Brazil community, we only had maybe 3,000 hours in the archives, and now we have over 6,000 hours in the archives. So the gap has increased. So people who didn't know back then at least didn't have as much of a challenge as they have today. So the challenge is worse. Well, who's the mediator? We are. We're the mediator. We're the ones who can bridge that gap for them. So we have to step up our game. We have to be more skillful. And we already have gone through that shock. We've already adapted to that shock. How long is this adaptation process going to take? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? So, we may be in an existential crisis within the next 60 days, but we will overcome that because we have the gravitational stability to do that. And the difference, of course, is that stuff that's passing through us, which is actually not helping us in any way, except, we just kind of watch a train go by. Well, that train is going to stop. We will be able to absorb that energy, and we'll be able to patch into the cosmic rays of the universe. Well, hello. That's a game changer. That's a real game changer. So, but what does that mean? So we're going to win? Win what? A cup? We're going to win a cup? What is that? It's a piece of metal. We don't need that right now. What we need is peace and prosperity and harmony. And we need to connect with the rest of the universal community because that's the point. That's the point. They are not superior to us. In fact, we are superior to them in terms of skill. We have a skill that we didn't even know we had this skill, and that skill is to manifest in physicality. Well, that's great. Okay, but does that make us superior? No, that makes us more skillful. So that's the reason why. And so when we connect with the universal community and share that skill, guess what? 1 and 1 is more than 2. Okay, and then what we'll have is healthy neighbors, and healthy neighbors contribute to a healthy community. And that's what we need. So how fast is this rate of change going to happen? It's never going to be fast enough. But once we get on that path, and we are on that path because we're after December the 16th. See, this is the thing. When you talk to someone about the plasma science, they don't want to hear it. But if you talk to them about the creator, then they want to beat you up. So there has to be some kind of, graceful point in between where we can bridge this. And that's going to be our skill level. How do we achieve that? So the work continues.
Yeah, I think he said the soul of totality will bring the change. So maybe when we reach a certain number of people in a collective, that change will happen. But I think it's going to be, again, it can't be delivered in one blow. It'd be too much for the system to handle the structure here. So little by little, and then it speeds up.
Yeah, I was in a room with 9 other people, and we were, entertaining the subject. Yes, and I wasn't the one being entertained. I was the show. Everybody was looking at me as if I was on stage because I was the only one who was clueless. And during that moment, what I was doing was measuring the distance between where I was sitting and the exit door. And I was thinking, how fast could I get up and run out the door? could I open the door fast enough so that I wouldn't go through the window? Uh, but I decided to stay, and it was just so funny because everybody knew except me. What a shocking experience. Well, now, we're still kind of in the minority, right? Except that now we're in a minority of knowledge seekers, knowledge finders. And so what do we do with that knowledge? Do we just walk away from it? No, because we have to live in this earth space.
Their souls will bring them in, Alex. There's no question about it. Just the way we were in the same position as they were most of our lives, or part of our lives, or however long it took until somehow we woke up to this, or we were allowed to see a different understanding or a deeper understanding in this whole. And it has to do again with the ancestors as well. So there's a lot of factors, but no problem. It's all going to be delivered. I'm trying to get away from I want it now sort of thing, or by next week or by the end of this year, it must be delivered, or, I'm out of here. No, not at all. We'll see the change. The change is already happening. There's much more change behind the scenes than we're even aware of. They may even, as Mr. Kesh said, when the 5G came out, they had planned it for 2 or 3 or 4 years before that, getting all the systems in place, and so that when the rollout came, the phones would work. So I think it's the same with the technology. Everything is getting prepared in a way in the background. And then we'll see it. Mr. Kesh, as soon as he opens the gate, with any cattle pen or sheep pen, as soon as you open the gate, usually you have a huge flood moving in that direction. And this is what I think we'll see here, but it's up to the foundation when and how much of it is going to be released.
Yeah, but we don't have to. I'm sorry to say, but no, we don't have to dwell on, our own individual knowledge. We are all part of a process, and we all have the equal capabilities. So, we all give time and attention to different things. So, if you spend all your time on the soccer field, well, the chances are that you're going to improve in that skill. And someone who isn't, someone who spends all their time with a motor vehicle, well, they're going to improve that skill. But the two can definitely coexist. So the motor mechanic can enjoy the entertainment of the soccer player, and the soccer player can get to the game because of the motor mechanic. So this is how they all work together, and so therefore, in that regard, that they're definitely equal, even though they are highly skilled in their own profession of choice. So now we have new professions that are coming, new choices. And we haven't made those choices yet because we're just starting to understand the rules. And from our perspective, December the 16th is in the past tense for so many people. Well, they haven't experienced that yet. This is still part of their future. So the adaptation is going to be a prime prerequisite. And how do we play into that? And Dean had asked me a question as to, how I plan my classes. And the small answer probably should have been, it's the things I don't know which direct me. It's the things that I do know that are the brackets around what I don't know. So I know this and it's not that, and I know this and it's not that. And so someplace in between, that's the path I need to go. And where's that path possibly leading? And so when you follow that path and you look at your neighbors and you say, well, I have to navigate between these two fields. So I'm going down this other field. And then suddenly it opens up and you say, oh man, how could I have not seen all this? Well, it's hard to see when 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, we are inundated with propaganda. And I never thought that we had propaganda in Canada until I went to the library and I seen a book with Einstein and his buddy Steinbeck. And then I seen this background, which, you know, could have been a curtain or something. And not 2 feet away in the library stacks was another book of Tesla. And in that picture was Einstein and Steinbeck. And Tesla was the third man in between, standing behind them. Unbelievable. The evidence was right there, 2 feet apart in the library. And I said, I would have never believed that there was censorship in Canada. And, you know, talk about being crushed. That was really disheartening for me.
Well, our future is very bright and getting brighter, Alex, so I don't think there's any need to sort of feel sad about what's happened in the past, other than to mend the fences or balance the fields in whatever way. And I think these systems will allow us to do that as well.
Well, and that's exactly a very good point, Mark, because the truth wins out. That's the thing. The truth wins out all the time. You just can't hide it. You know, you can hide it in how you think you can hide it, but then you turn around and you just, you know, it comes out in other ways. And it's actually laughable how the artificial intelligence on YouTube is working, because they fill in, you know, the topics that are popular at that time. And you know, if you mention the word knitting, then all of a sudden all these knitting videos pop up. I learned a lot about knitting. Knit one, purl two, a few other things. There's a whole industry in knitting. But anyway, it's that interest was short lived. But you know, there's one thing to be said about artificial intelligence, and only one thing to be said about it. It's artificial. What we need is to discuss reality, and that's what mature people do. So, you know, we're all going through that maturation process, and we realize that we came here as children, and we're leaving as adults, and there's a reason for that. And I think this is going to be a massive revelation for a lot of people, because Mitra had children.
Okay, let's see if someone else would like to jump in here. We don't want to take the whole
You don't
time.
want to hog the limelight?
Yeah, not really. We're being brought along. We're all being, the whole planet is. The fields are changing. There's, as I said, the background is where the bigger things are happening. We're just not aware of them till they're announced. Would someone else like to raise a point, a question, share a poem, perhaps? And if not, that's fine as well.
So, Mark, I want to take this opportunity, please. I want to thank all the participants of today's panel. And I want to thank you for allowing me to be on this journey. And thanks to all the members of all the classes in all the various groups that are helping to make this, the North American meeting, so powerful. And I mean that sincerely, because we're covering a lot of ground here that is difficult to talk to, even amongst your friends. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for allowing us to continue, and we will continue because it's not done, but it's not a labor. It's a labor of love, and the love will be going out from here and around the world through the Peace Dome. And we're all part of it. So thank you all, and Happy New Year.
Okay, one more time. Would anyone like to come forward and raise a point, a question, bring up something for discussion? If not, I did find that little part that I couldn't find before about what Mr. Kesh said about connecting the soul of the planet to your soul in a certain way, where with that interaction and with your aura will create a sort of light. That he referenced these new space cities, and this will be the light in these space cities. So we have some amazing, totally amazing features that we didn't even know we came with, or we had forgotten, but it's all there.
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't only take a time for say thank you so much, Alex, again for one new year for blessed your knowledge, and for Mark, all time is here with us, and for many people around the world in the Keshe family, all time help us and bring different help different ways. So thank you so much. Of course, Mr. Kesh first, and thank you, my teacher too.
Yes, I'm sure there's many, many more people exploring and developing this knowledge than we're aware of. Many, many more knowledge seekers. We only see sort of this part of the world in a way, but there's many, many people out there working with the governments as well as individually, I think, on developing this technology. Although, as Mr. Kesh said, we haven't given you all the keys yet. And so we let the scientists work and play and try to explore more of this knowledge, but it'll be up to the foundation and Mr. Kesh exactly how this is released to us. We'll be able to use it, fully use the technology, but may not have the complete understanding, just like the phone. He's used that example. You don't need to be able to build a phone to be able to text with it, talk with it, and do your banking with it and everything else you do with it. You don't have to know how to build the phone, but this is what we're being allowed to use, are these systems. And we'll have full access to all of it. So encourage everyone to join in the sessions, the monthly sessions. And if you can't afford it, no worries. We're the ones that can afford it will pay for it now. And then in the future, it will just to perfect the system. And then the cost will reduce down to where everyone can have it. I don't know if it'll ever become free. And any monies that are paid into the foundation, it's almost like a feedback loop. It just gets put right back into the structure to expand even more. So that's the whole process. It's a feedback loop.
And we all have to remember, Mark, please, that we still need to keep making the cups of life. They're not the cups of the pandemic, and they never were. They're the cups of life, and we need them. The more we have, the more ground satellites we have. So please make them and teach others how to make them.
No question. He said you have everything you need in both of those cups. He went through a bit of an explanation in this workshop as well. Many, many points in the workshop. All right, shall we hear the last clip and then the final disclaimer and the meeting will end? Did someone want to bring something else into the meeting? Okay,
Hi.
yes. Selena,
Yes. I want to say something now.
please.
This year we'll know we are multi-dimensional being and we live together and everything is inside us. Just we need to open our heart and understand it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've had a great 2022, one of the best years, Mr. Kesh said, of the Kesh Foundation. And now we'll be moving with that momentum into 2023. And I think things will literally take off, as they say. We're going to be seeing a lot of firsts, a lot of amazing things that it won't be for the faint-hearted at first, but I think with the religions and some of these other structures starting to weaken as this technology gets revealed, more and more of us will become more interested in it and want to know more and seek out this knowledge more than we have in the past, let's say. So we have a beautiful future. And of course, with the universal community as well, this is going to be a whole he's talking about physical interactions, maybe on the soul level first, but then even with the physicality. So it's just an amazing process that is planned already, and we're all going to take part in it in big and small ways. But staying humble is a big key to it. I brought that up earlier about when Ike asked Mr. Kesh, how do you stay so humble with carrying the totality? Because he said the knowledge doesn't belong to me, it was gifted to me. So I think we're all receiving gifts. And this will be the year of giving. And I know Mr. Kesh wants to give more faster, but again, we want the change faster too, but it's the timing. I think that's the critical. Everything has to be in its right place for it to be delivered. And then it will open up.
Mark,
Yes.
I don't know much about methamphetamines. There, I said it properly.
Okay.
This connection with anhydrous ammonia, I only found that out this morning. I feel so stupid. I only brought this subject up because of the cargo cult. And I've seen anhydrous ammonia being used as a fertilizer, and yet it's a soil hardener. How does that work? And it's hydrophobic. What? Can you imagine hydrophobic fertilizer for plants that need water? And anyway, but I never seen this connection.
I haven't either.
And anyway, this is how we learn. Wouldn't have gone down this path if it wasn't for the cargo cult and learned about the cargo cult over 30 years ago. And what's really funny, but not funny, is the gentleman who taught me about that was not very above board in his, shall we say, financial dealings. So the only reason I listened to him was to learn. And he was quite happy to tell me about it, bragging, in fact. And he told me more than he even knows, because I knew how to connect things. So anyway, thanks to him for that knowledge. But hopefully your service to mankind will graduate to a much more better conclusion.
Yeah, we go out in the universe and we replicate the same processes here. This is what I see. This is why Mr.
Well,
Kesh is taking us through this on how to elevate a whole structure, a planetary structure.
yeah, we're going to change the playing field. That's what we're doing.
The whole universe is going to change.
Yes, sir.
And again, a gift from the creator, more or less. But the universe is creating new civilizations, new life all the time. So there'll be a need for a continual elevation, I think. I don't know how that will change, or if there will come a point where everything is created in perfection. Maybe with the new child of Mitra and so on and so forth, these other civilizations will go through a very similar process. And maybe that'll be put into the field so that when something new is created, it's created with this new soul. And then what are we going to do for fun? But I don't think we'll ever run out of work, or we know the knowledge is endless. So I think there'll be, again, we can't imagine what's out there. Mr. Kesh comes up with so many things that I've never even thought about before, but he just brings them up like if it's second nature, which it is.
Well,
we're very
what do
fortunate.
you do in the universal community anyway?
Well, as he said, there's civilizations that are just study amino acids. So depending on where you're, what you want to learn, you may spend some time with that civilization and bring back some of the knowledge here. I think it's a knowledge sharing community that they're more than happy to share with the others. I don't know what will open that up. Sometimes I think they like to be to themselves in a way, but yet they work together. I don't know. But we have a very, as Marie said in the telegram, a glorious future awaits us.
100%.
Yeah. Well, if no one has any other things they'd like to bring up at this point, remember the 9 p.m. for the elevation of souls every day, started by the Universal Council, and of course the Brazil meeting on Wednesdays for the same purpose, and the daily intentions. The One Planet, One Nation, One Race on Tuesday. That's what we're doing here. We're making a one planet race out of this planet. And of course, Wednesday is the reactor group. You're all invited there. And as we heard, Rick is some sort of special individual, although I don't think he feels that way. He's very humble about everything. Thursday, the Knowledge Seekers Workshop, and so on. So there's many activities, and there'll be many more. And once this opens up, I think we'll have a lot of people coming and wanting to know more. Yeah, maybe some naysayers in the beginning, but that will all be shown through the technology, that the technology is correct, and that what has been promised is being delivered. And you'll see it. We've already missed it, I don't know how many times, as he said, with the toe being grown and so many other things, the Magrav, we've missed many, many, many things. But we'll go back and we'll review it and revisit all these knowledges and just add to our own to be able to share more. That's the way I see it, anyway.
Oh, you caused a silly thing to cross my mind here. Our hair grows, we cut it. And our fingernails grow and we cut them.
Yes.
Well, we only cut ourselves, generally speaking, with, through accident, but these things are, part of our social, well, it's helpful, if your fingernails are too long, then you can't do much work, which is one of the reasons the Chinese princesses always had really long fingernails, because they didn't do anything. They had people do it for them. But the point I'm going through is that nature is always showing us how things work. So when we ask the question, we have to recognize the answer. And that first answer is that it's possible. That it's possible. So as soon as we know that it's possible, and if we don't know the answer, then we know that it's us who doesn't know the answer, not that there is no answer. And what used to, shall we say, vex me was when a professor would say, "I don't know." Okay, then. I guess that's the end of that conversation. So, but as knowledge seekers, that points us in the right direction. So, you just brought that up, and I never even considered that until now. But it's something I often wondered, especially as I was cutting my nails. How am I able to do that? And interestingly, there's no real pain attached with that unless you don't cut it properly, and then you might get some pain with it. But the whole idea is that you're now cutting dead matter. Well, is that even an accurate description? We have to revisit all of these things. Isn't
We
that
will.
correct?
Yes, yes. I think the whole humanity is going to rethink so many different things, especially in the areas of the religious world, and how we've been sort of taken in a way, our pockets and our souls. So this will all open up for everyone to see more as we start to move deeper into the knowledge and share it more. And the veils will be lifted off humanity, and they'll see really who they are in the universe. So there's again, I don't know the entire plan, but it's a beautiful plan. And it's been done in many different places of the universe before. Now, man may be a little bit different. As he said, we're going to be the first to understand this knowledge in a way, the way the creator moves without ships and so on and so forth. But eventually the universal community will mature up to that level, as Takesha told us. So, and we'll be sharing it with them, especially feeding. He said they eat something, but we're going to teach them how to use the cosmic rays for feeding. But he did say they don't kill to eat. So maybe there's some other entities or other energies out there that they are consuming that maybe is not the right path to go down. I don't know.
Okay,
Yes.
I forgive you. You said you don't know. I forgive you. You're not a professor of know-it-all.
No.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for all that you've
Yep.
been.
Yeah, no,
doing.
we're all brought here by our souls, so it's nothing special for anyone, I don't think, other than the soul has brought us here to do. The physicality is just the afterthought. We're just tagging along in a way. The soul is the one that's running the shows, as I see it at this point. Okay, anyone else want to add a thought before I go into this question about the power plant and what Mr. Kesh is planning on doing with some of these energies as he connects us in a special way to the soul of the planet? And then we sort of, again, I'll let him explain it.